Welcome, everybody, to our Novoni member-only event. I decided to add a third webinar in May before we headed into our June, into our summer months. I thought it appropriate to do a spring cleanup webinar since I was out in the yard all weekend, pulling weeds and pruning my bushes and, tending to my garden all weekend. And it was totally appropriate. Maybe not for our attendees that are in warm weather all the time, but you have constant sunshine and you're probably constantly tending to your garden. But now that spring is upon us, I thought it appropriate to do a weeding your garden or spring cleanup webinar and talk about the different places in Dentrix where we can clean up our system. And sometimes it is challenging because we don't know really how to clean up the system. If we can, how does it affect other things? So that's what we're going to be going through today. So we are recording. It will be up in our practice management tab of the past events, so you can rewatch it at any time. Remember that our recorded webinars always come with one AGD CE credit. So if you do need that credit, you will receive a survey link. The AGD does require that we do a survey attached to our webinars. So in order to get that CE verification number, make sure you do the survey at the end of the webinar. So without further ado, I'm going to turn off my camera and say goodbye to everybody and start the webinar for today. So thank you all for being on. And always remember, you can ask questions throughout the webinar if you have anything you want to ask me live. All righty, so what are we going to go through today? Well, we are doing spring database cleanup, and we are going to first talk about the common places for cleanup, like where can you get rid of duplicates, where can you get rid of multiple places where we store garbage in our database. And so what we're going to do is learn how to clean it up safely and effectively, because, over time, you have different employees that are coming and going. You have different ways of thinking about the software. And so you may have an employee that comes in and wants to set things up this way, and then that employee leaves and you have a new team member that comes in and they want to set things up this way. And so over time, just with this natural turnover with team members, your database gets bogged down with duplicates, with just unnecessary garbage in your database. And so what I want to do today is talk about the different places where you can clean up your database. So one of those places we're going to look at today is your payment and adjustment types. So which kind of puts us into the definitions in Dentrix. So the definitions is probably one of the places where we can do the biggest database cleanup. However, it's also one of the places where it's the hardest because it could potentially affect your patient's history, because a lot of these payments and adjustment types have been used in history, in the patient's ledger. And so, what I'm going to do today is kind of at least show you some ways that we can clean it up. Another place that we find garbage in our database is insurance plans, referral sources, things like that. So we're going to look at how we can clean up our duplicate insurance plans. And then I want to make sure that everybody has their month end set up properly, because month end is also a process that really helps keep our database as clean as possible. And so I'm going to run through the new month end task scheduler with you all and make sure that you have it set up properly and make sure that it's running. What I'm finding is a lot of people with the new month-end task schedulers, it's not even running. So I want to make sure that that's all set up properly. And then the last place we're going to look at is providers. Oh my gosh, this is a place that just gets really bogged down with a big long list of providers that are really not needed anywhere because you've had, provider turnover and things like that. So what I'm going to do now is switch over to Dentrix. I guess I rebooted my system, and let me get into the tutor database here really quickly, and then we'll get into that. All right, let's see. I had to reboot my system because I just installed G7.2, so I'm now on Dentrix G7.2, and the tutor database wasn't working the way it should, so I had to call support. Yes, I do have to call support every once in a while. You may think that I know everything about Dentrix, and sometimes I do know more than the support text, but I actually had to call support because the procedure codes weren't in there properly. So first, cleanup. First, let's look at definitions, okay? So definitions is a place in Dentrix right here where you will find your adjustment types are in the definitions, your payment types, your if you're in older versions of Dentrix prior to G7, if you're on a database prior to G7, this is also where your medical alerts is located. Medical alerts have now been moved into the health history section if you're on G7 or above. The definitions is also where you will find any of your billing types as well. So let's look at adjustment types first. This is a place where I do see offices gathering lots of duplicates. And where I notice it is a lot of times with generic types of adjustments. So for example, you might have a write-off, and then you might also have a credit adjustment. Now, in my eyes, those both are generic, vague adjustment types. So you might also have one that's called, in-office adjustment. So over time, you can potentially end up with lots of different adjustment types. And so you're only allowed 40 in the list. And so a lot of times people end up with the maximum allowable of adjustment types, and then they don't know how to clean it up. And then I was just online with an office this morning. We were doing some training, and I noticed that they had, in parentheses, they had a big I in front of some of their adjustments to show the team that don't use that adjustment type because it's inactive. We don't want to use it. And what it turned out to be is they were just duplicates. They had insurance adjustment in there 3 times. And I'm like, well, let's just clean those up. So if you have duplicate in adjustment types, and they might not all be spelled the same, but they all might mean the same thing. So if you have an adjustment type that's called credit adjustment, in-office write-off, miscellaneous adjustment, in-office adjustment, anything that's super vague or generic, in my opinion, those are all duplicates. And so but they may have all been used in certain situations in your patient's ledger. So if you end up with duplicates, and they basically mean the same thing, then you can delete it. So for example, if I have this in-office adjustment, and I'm going to get rid of it, anytime you're working with the definitions, you have to give it a replacement. You can't just delete an adjustment arbitrarily because it has been used in the patient's ledger. And so we do have to give it a replacement. So if I was going to adjust or delete the in-office adjustment, and I'm going to make it into this credit I'm going to replace it with credit adjustment. Then I'm going to just click OK, and I'm going to click OK, and then it will tell me how many records it affected, okay? So you'll see here, right here, it'll tell you if it changed any patient records during that delete process, okay? And then let's say I think this is a duplicate as well. I'm going to delete that one. I'm going to replace it with credit adjustment again, and then click OK. And it just tells me again there were no records affected, and I'm good to go with that. So that's how you can delete duplicate adjustment types. Same thing goes for your payment types. So over time, you may end up with multiple types of payments. Like, for example, I've seen some offices where they end up with multiple check payments because they click on the word add too soon. So they end up with all these check payments at the end. I see this all the time in offices. So if this has happened to you, then same thing applies because we're still in the definitions. So the same thing applies. If I'm going to try and delete this duplicate check payment, then I can replace it with another check payment. And it shows you that it modified one record, okay? So there was one history where it moved from the old check payment type to the new check payment type. So it tells you how many records were affected. So I'm going to delete this one too. Move all this number 10 into number 1. And again, it affected one record. Now, let's say that, for example, you have all of your credit cards in one, all broken up into separate credit card types. And you've got Visa, you have MasterCard, you have Discover, and you have Amex. But you just want to combine them all together. Let's say you just want to have credit card payment. Well, you could create credit card payment, or you could say, okay, I don't really care about breaking these all up. I'm just going to call it credit card payment. And you do have to abbreviate. So I'm going to change this to say credit card payment. And then I'm going to say, okay, I'm going to get rid of Amex. I'm going to move it into my credit card payment. And then I'm going to get rid of my Discover. I'm going to delete that and move it into credit card payment. So it will affect your patient history in the ledger. So if you had posted an Amex payment to a patient like 2 years ago, and you're now deleting this definition, it now, in their history, it's now going to say credit card payment. So that's why you do have to be a little bit careful when you're working with these definitions, because it will affect the patient's ledger history. So that's probably the most important thing when you are cleaning up your definitions. Now you'll notice here that in the list, it goes from 3 to 7. See how that now it goes 1, 2, 3, 7, 8, 9. So if you were to add new payment types, it's not going to add to number 10. It's going to add number 4. So now it's going to add 4, 5, 6 before it adds on a number 10. Does that make sense? Let me know if you have any questions about that, because that can be kind of confusing, because if you go to now add a new payment type, let's say I'm going to add, I want to start tracking my over-the-counter collections. So I'm going to add an over-the-counter check payment. So as soon as I click add, watch where it puts it, okay? It's going to put it in number 4. See that? And now if I added an over-the-counter credit card payment, it's going to add it to number 5. See that? See how that happened? Okay? So just to give you an idea of what's going to happen there. All right, maybe you need to also add a care credit payment. Okay? If you're using Dentrix 7.1 or higher, you now have a care credit integration that is integrated fully into the patient's ledger. So this is going to be one place where you will have to add a care credit payment type if you haven't already. So see, now it's filled up the 4, 5, and 6 now with my new payment types. All right, so that's how you'd have to do the definitions. Anytime you're going to delete or try and inactivate these old definitions, you do have to give it a replacement. So make sure that it is something very similar. Otherwise, you're going to wreak havoc in your patient's ledger histories. All right, next spot. Insurance plans. All right, this is where it becomes a little bit challenging. I'm going to go here into insurance maintenance. So if you're following along today, maintenance, reference, and then insurance maintenance. So this is where you might end up with some duplicates, okay? And it's very common. It happens a lot. And so this is a place where, you may have to spend some time cleaning up your duplicates. Now, let's say, for example, I'm just going to add as a new plan. So let's say I end up with a duplicate. So I ended up with this one and this one. Most of the time, you can tell if it's a duplicate by the group number, okay? But not always. So that's not always the case. But see, so I've got the same group number here and the same group number here. Now, most of the time, if you see the same group number, it could potentially be a duplicate. So, except there are some exceptions to that. When I used to live in the state of Washington, we had Group 186, which was the school district, the school teachers, but we might have Group 186 at 70% for preventative, but then we might have a Group 186 that's at the incentive level of 100% for preventative. So we actually ended up having 4 separate plans for the school teachers. They were all Group 186, but they had different coverages because they were on an incentive level. But for the most part, most of the time, if the group number is the same, it's more than likely a duplicate. So with that being said, then when you have 2 plans that are the same, you've accidentally added 2 plans that are the same, then you can do one of 2 things, all right? The first thing you can do is join the plans together. When you join plans together, what it does is it moves any patients that are on Plan A and moves all those patients to Plan B, all right? It doesn't delete the plan out of your system. It doesn't inactivate it. All it does by joining the plans is it moves all the patients from Plan A into Plan B. So it empties out Plan A. So that's what I'm going to show you. So we pick a source plan, which is my first duplicate. My Allied Southwest. And then I'm going to pick my other plan. So what this says here is any patients associated with the source are going to get moved to the destination. Okay? So as soon as I click join, then it joins those plans together. Now you'll notice, see how it really didn't do anything to your list, all right? That's because it really hasn't done anything at all. So then you have two choices here, okay? I'm going to give you two options for getting rid of this duplicate, okay? The first thing you can do is you can purge the plan, okay, with this right here. Now, anytime you join plans together or you purge plans, everybody in Dentrix has to get out of Dentrix. So this is one of the processes that everybody has to be out of Dentrix. So you have to do it either after hours or, you know, on a Friday or something like that when everybody can be out of the system. Now, if you purge your plan and it has been used in the past, in the patient's ledger history, so it was attached to a claim at some point in time, and that claim was paid and, you know, everything was good, but you're now purging this duplicate. If you ever go back into the patient's ledger history and this is the plan you've used and now you've purged it, it will say carrier not found in the insurance claim window, okay? So if you decide to purge your plan, just so you know, if you ever then go to the patient's ledger, and let me show you where exactly that would be. I just want you to have a clear understanding of what I'm talking about. I'm going to pull up a patient who I think has some history in here. Oh, that's surprising. This patient doesn't have any ledger history. So for example, I'm just going to batch a claim here. Okay, so if you purge a plan that you have used in the past, right here where it says carrier, if you purge the plan, it will now say carrier not found. Okay, I just want you to know that so that you don't come back yelling at me if you purge plans and you're like, she didn't tell me that. So go back up here to insurance maintenance. Okay, so you have these two duplicates, this one and this one. We've already done the join. Now, if you're going to purge, you can purge, and you can delete all these plans. They'll come up with all these plans in this list, and you can delete them all because they are not attached to any patients anymore. And if you delete them all, then it will wipe them out of your system. Okay? So that's one way. The other way is to keep it in your system, but just kind of get it out of the list a little ways. And I think if I've worked with you before on cleaning up duplicate insurance plans, you may have heard this before, but what I really prefer to do is maybe just leave it in the system, but put a bunch of Z's in front of it. And what that does is it moves it down to the bottom of the list. Okay? So all it does is move this duplicate down to the very bottom of the list. So it gets it out of your Blue Cross category and just moves it way down here to the bottom. Now, the reason I like doing that better is that now if I have used that claim or that insurance plan in the past, it's not going to say carrier not found. It's going to say ZZZZZ Blue Cross. So at least I know it was a Blue Cross plan that patient was assigned to at some point. The other thing I like with the Z's is that, you know, it flags your team members that if you see that plan with the Z's, you know not to use it for anything. So you can decide. It's totally up to you. Two options. You can purge your plans, get them out of the system, or put Z's in front of the carrier name and move them to the bottom of the list. Okay? It's up to you. All right, any questions about that? You guys are pretty quiet so far. Anything I should be following up on? Looks all good. Okay. All right, cool. The next place we can do some cleanup work, pull some weeds in our database, is with providers. So let's look at providers. That's here in your practice resource setup. All right. So I've been with a couple offices over the past couple months that did have several providers that were no longer working for the practice. I was also in a practice in New York recently where they had team members, like their admin team was listed as providers, which I don't know how that happened, but it did, and we had to now clean it up. So first of all, let's define who providers are and who is staff, okay? So providers up here are any people on your team who are producers, okay? This would be somebody that is usually a doctor or hygienist. It could also be a dental assistant if you are scheduling that dental assistant with appointments, and they are producing. So, for example, maybe your assistants are doing night guard impressions, or they're doing child prophies, or they do ortho checks, or, you know, something in the schedule. So you need to make an appointment with a provider. Another person, or actually entity that could be a provider, is if you have the name of your clinic. So if you have, you know, Smiles for Life Dental Clinic, and you have a type 2 MPI number that you have to use on your claims, then you would have to create them as a provider. So they may not actually, you may never schedule appointments with that provider, but they do have to be a provider in order to get on a claim form if they are like the owner of the practice. So if you have the name of your clinic in there. Now, sometimes what I see up here in providers is things like new patient, or emergency, or Medicaid, and offices will do that primarily so they can see the different colors on the appointment book. So I'm not a big fan of that. Just to make it really clear, I don't like that situation. I think that it causes too much problems with your reports and the practice advisor report. So I'm not a big fan of that at all. In my opinion, providers should be producers or the clinic name. And then team members, anybody else should go down here under staff. All your admin team, if you have a consultant who you have listed as a team member, if your IT people have to have an ID available, then put them under staff as well. Okay, so how do we clean up these duplicate providers? Now, this is another place where everyone does have to be out of the system in order to do this. So, for example, if DDS3 is no longer working at your practice and you need to inactivate Maria, then you click on Inactivate. And same thing, just like in your definitions, you do have to give them a replacement provider. So who are we going to replace Maria with? Now, anytime you inactivate a provider, it does not affect anything in history, okay? Unlike the definitions, which will affect the history, inactivating providers does not affect history at all, okay? The only thing it's going to affect is anything in the future. So, for example, if Maria has any future appointments scheduled with her, they will switch over to the replacement provider. Any patients who are listed with her as the primary provider, this will switch over to the replacement provider. If you've set up goals in your system for Maria, those goals will then switch over to the replacement provider. Any treatment plan will switch over to her. So only stuff in the future is going to be changed into the replacement provider when you inactivate a provider. So I'm going to click on Dennis. I'm going to replace Maria with Dennis. Click OK, and then as soon as I click OK, oh, it tells me that I have a module open. So let me close down my ledger, and I'll retry that. Okay, so it inactivated Maria. She is now listed as an inactive provider. Now, what if Maria comes back? You know, what if she went to work at another practice and she, you know, didn't like it there and she wanted to come back? You can activate her and bring her back to life if you want. And then she's back as a primary provider. So, but it doesn't switch anything back if you reactivate them, just so you know, okay? Same thing goes for your team. If, you know, Susan is no longer working at your practice and you need to inactivate Susan, then we can inactivate her with Judy, and then it will inactivate Judy. Now, you'll notice how fast my system inactivated providers. For those of you that are on the call, I have worked with you on inactivating providers, and you do know it takes quite a bit longer if you have a larger database than I do. So one recommendation, big tip recommendation here is if you're ever going to inactivate providers, please try and do it on the server. It will go faster on the server, not a huge amount faster, but it will go faster on the server. And it could take anywhere between 2 to 4 minutes per provider to inactivate. So if you have, you know, 20 patients to inactivate, it could potentially take, you know, several hours to get that done. So just kind of plan for that if you're going to do that out on an off day, or, you know, before the team comes in the morning or things like that. Okay? Any questions about inactivating providers? All right, no questions so far. All right. All right, last thing I'm going to go through is the month-end process, because there is also some other cleanup procedures that happen during month-end. All right, so if you have, boy, the month-end task scheduler, I think, came about with Dentrix G6.5, I believe. I could be wrong about that, but I know it's been around for a while. So the month-end task scheduler is new because in the past, the Dentrix month-end process was, it processed like 5 things all at the same time. Now with the month-end task scheduler, you actually can separate out the tasks so they happen whenever you want them to happen. So you can schedule all those 5 important things individually. Now, I'm not going to go through all the things that you should do with month-end, but I am going to show you the things that should be cleaned up as part of your database cleanup, okay? So one thing is this recalculate totals. Recalculate totals should be run on a daily basis, okay? So add that to your month-end queue for your daily task scheduler. Recalculate totals, what that does is sometimes you might have noticed, if you notice that a patient's ledger might not be accurate, or if you print a statement, it might look different than the ledger balance. Or if you've looked at those 4 key numbers, those 4 totals, you've noticed that maybe one of them's gotten off kilter, okay? So that could happen if maybe you've had a small power surge during looking at a ledger or processing a payment or something, then your totals can get off kilter. And so recalculate totals is a way to keep your system accurate and up to date. Purge appointments, okay? Purge, I know that sounds scary to purge appointments off your appointment book, but it is part of the cleanup process. I have gone into offices where I've tried to run the daily huddle report or the practice advisor, and I haven't been able to run either one of them. And the reason is because they had like 20 years of appointments on their appointment book, which was really messing with the report. So I don't recommend purging appointments less than 3 years ago. So what I usually do is just bump this number up to 3. So I usually try and keep 3 years of appointments on my appointment book. Now maybe you drop it down to 2 or maybe even 1, but just make sure you're leaving at least a year or 2 or 3 on your appointment book. But you don't need 10 years worth of appointments on your appointment book. It just clogs up your system and it makes your reports inaccurate and run slower. So if you get rid of some of those old appointments, your system will run cleaner and more efficiently. The next thing is purge exported files. You can also add that to your daily queue. This is anytime you might be on support where they might be storing a old version of a file or logs or things like that from utilities. You can export all that junk out of your system. So you can do that on a monthly basis is probably fine. And then your unscheduled appointments. So this is like one of my biggest pet peeves is I go into offices all the time and they have like years of appointments on their unscheduled list. And so many of you that have worked with me, you know that kind of my rule of thumb here is that I only want to see maybe 8 to 12 weeks, like 3 months worth of appointments on the unscheduled list. Now, if you have never purged your unscheduled list and you know you have like 3 years worth of appointments on your unscheduled list, you may want to consider running it now and, saying, okay, at least get it down to 6 months ago, okay? And then you can start working it on a regular basis after you've purged it. But usually the reason why people stop using the unscheduled list is because it just gets too darn long. And then you stop looking at it. And the unscheduled list is a great resource for keeping your schedule full and helping you to fill those short notice openings and following up with patients who have missed appointments. And it's just a great holding bucket for people that need an appointment now. But if you let the appointment sit there too long, and then over time, that appointment sits there for years, and you just stop working that report. So the unscheduled list is a great place to purge, to keep. It's a great resource for filling your schedule, but make sure that you're keeping it clean. So I say no more than 3 months of appointments on your unscheduled list, but if you've never purged it, you may want to come in and do that right now and clean it up a little bit. All right, and then also make sure that on your month-end task scheduler that you are resetting your insurance benefits. Add that into your monthly queue so that happens on a regular basis. And so those are the big cleanup things with the month-end process is recalculating the totals, purging exported files, resetting insurance benefits, purging appointments, and purging your unscheduled list. All right. All right, awesome. Any questions about anything that we've talked about today? Guys all good? All right. So just to recap, let's go back to the office manager. So we talked about definitions, how you can clean up your duplicate insurance or your duplicate adjustment types, your duplicate billing types, duplicate payment types, clean those up, learning how to replace it with something else, cleaning up your insurance, duplicate insurance plans, things like that. You can join and purge. Another place that you can try and clean up is your referral maintenance. So if you have any kind of referrals that have a 0 on them, you can delete those. But if you have duplicates in here, it's not as easy to clean it up. So unfortunately, there isn't a way that I can say, hey, I have a web search and then I have a Google search. How do I get rid of one of them? Well, if they have patients attached to both of them, you can't get rid of one of them. So cleaning up your duplicate referral sources is there's just no way to do it like the definitions. So what you could do is you really could just edit it and put a bunch of Z's in front of it, like I talked about with the insurance, push it to the bottom of the list, and then get people to stop using it. That's really the only way you can clean up your referral sources, because it won't let you delete it if it doesn't have a 0 next to it. All right. Questions? Questions? No questions. All right. Well, thank you guys for being on. You will receive the recording within the next 24 hours with a link to the recording, a link to the survey so you can get your CE credit if you need that. And then be with us next time for our next live event. We have live webinars, usually weekly, and so I look forward to having you join us with our next one. All right, thanks guys for being online today.